So it is the time for the live keynote address by Nir Eyal, the author of the worldwide best-selling book, Hooked, a book that redefined the entire product management world and introduced us to the concept of habit-forming products. Hooked has sold over 2 lakh copies worldwide. We all own a copy of it too, like, don't we? Need has also authored Indistractable, and you can catch up with him on his latest insights on neerinfa.com, where he blogs regularly. With an MBA from Stanford, he is also taught at Stanford Graduate School of Business and Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design. His writing on technology, psychology, and business appears in the Harvard Business Review, The Atlantic, TechCrunch, and Psychology Today. Nir is also an active investor in habit-forming technologies. Some of his past investments include Eventbrite, Product Hunt, Pantry, Kahoot, Refresh.io, and many more. In this session on how to build habit-forming mobile apps, Nir shares his expertise on how brands today can get their users hooked onto their mobile apps. Welcome, Nir. We are so excited to have you amongst us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome, Neil. We're so excited. And, I'm just gonna let the stage be yours because everybody's like so excited. So yes, it's all yours.
All right, terrific. Well, let me go ahead and share my slides here. Can you see the hooked slide? Can you just confirm that for me?
Yes, Neil, I can see
All
it.
right. Terrific. Well, welcome everyone. Today we are going to talk about these amazing products and services, these mobile apps that we're all carrying around with us every single day of our lives, and how profoundly they can change our day-to-day behaviors. And the idea here is that I want to help you learn about how we can figure out the patterns behind these companies that come out of nowhere, that kind of start out as toys, as these nice to haves, as these products that people see for the first time and they say, okay, what's the big deal? And then in the blink of an eye, they're making hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And they're doing that from hundreds of millions, if not billions of users. So who are the usual suspects here? Of course, it's companies like Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, Google, WhatsApp, Slack, Snapchat, these companies that all started out like toys and somehow did an unbelievably good job of changing consumer habits. And so what I want to help you do is to identify the patterns behind these companies. What is it that's endemic to these habit-forming products that you can learn from so you can build your own habit-forming mobile app? So there's a lot more that we're not going to be able to cover today. So I invite you to check out my book, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. It'll go into a lot more depth. But for the sake of discussion today, what I want to do is kind of give you a broad overview of the Hooked model, maybe about 20 minutes or so. And then we want to leave the rest of the time for your questions. My favorite thing to do, the thing you can't get from reading the book, is to actually do some one-on-one here and actually figure out what your direct questions might be so we can tackle your engagement and retention challenges around building your own habit-forming app. So let's start with what is a habit. Let's get on the same page here. A habit is defined as an impulse to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. It is not an addiction. This is not what we're talking about. It's not addictions. Addictions are harmful. Habits, however, can be very good. And that's why I do the work I do. Not to get people addicted, which is bad, but in fact, help people build good habits. Habits that help people exercise more, eat right, be more productive at work, connect with loved ones, all these things that we can do if we can build healthy habits in their lives. And the way we do this is by building a hook model into the user experience. You know, for many years, everybody was crazy about growth, right? Let's make everything go viral. But we saw company after company making the very same mistake of prioritizing growth before engagement. Remember, you can always buy growth. You just give Facebook a bunch of money or Google a bunch of money or television ads, radio spots. You can buy growth. That's what the venture capitalists are for. What you cannot buy is engagement. Engagement must be designed into the product. And to do that, we have to get users to come back to the product or service on their own with little or no conscious thought, purely out of habit. Imagine how amazing it would be if your app was something that people used on their own, not because of expensive advertising or spammy messaging, but because they triggered themselves. Well, to do that, you have got to build a hook into your mobile app. How do you do that? Well, you make sure that you have this hook model built right into the user experience. Let's define what is a hook model. A hook is an experience designed to connect the user's problem to your product with enough frequency to form a habit. Let me say it again, connecting your user's problem to your product with enough frequency to form a habit. Now, these hooks all have 4 basic steps. It doesn't matter what the product is, online, offline, mobile app, enterprise, SaaS products, direct to consumer, it doesn't matter. If a product needs to build a habit, it has got to have these 4 basic steps of a trigger, an action, a reward, and finally an investment. And it's through successive cycles through these hooks that these habits are formed. So let's dive right in. Let's start with the first step of the hook model, the trigger phase. Now, there are 2 kinds of triggers. The first kind of trigger is called an external trigger. This is what you'll be very familiar with. In the product design community, we know all about triggers. It's all the pings, dings, and rings in our outside environment that tells us what to do next. The information is inside the trigger itself. Those are external triggers, notifications, emails, anything that tells us what to do next. But what product designers don't think about enough, and what actually turns out to be even more important than these external triggers, are what we call the internal triggers. Internal triggers are where the information for what to do next isn't outside the user, but rather comes from a memory, an association inside the user's own head. Depending on, maybe they're around certain people, places, situations, routines, and most frequently, when they experience uncomfortable emotions. Uncomfortable emotions are the #1 source of these internal triggers. Because when we feel lonesome, bored, indecisive, fatigued, fearful, stressed, when we feel these uncomfortable emotional states, we look for relief. We look for something to take our mind off of that problem, to solve that problem for us. That is the itch that the customer has that we need to address for them. And so the goal here is to attach your product's use to these internal triggers. Now, if you don't believe how important this is, let me tell you about a study that we found a few years ago that people who suffer from depression actually check email more. How do we know this? People who suffer from depression actually check email more. Why would that be? It wasn't that the email was making them depressed. It's that people who suffer from clinical depression experience what psychologists call negative valence states. They feel down more frequently than the rest of the population. And what do they do to boost their mood, to be taken out of that negative valence state? They check their devices, they look at email, they open their phones more than the rest of the population. So if we actually really think about this, we don't have to be depressed to use our devices because we feel a certain way. Quite the opposite. Ask yourself, where do people go when they're feeling lonely? What app or website do we check? Well, for many people, it's Facebook or Instagram or some other social network. Where do we go when we're feeling unsure about something? Before we ask ourselves if we know the answer to a question, what are we doing? We're Googling it. And what about if we're feeling bored, between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you have that big project you don't feel like working on right now, where do you go? Where there's many solutions to boredom. Maybe you watch a YouTube video, maybe you check Reddit, stock prices, sports scores, endless options to take our mind off of our current uncomfortable state by looking for escape with whatever product or service we might find. Now, what's the lesson here? The lesson here is that you have got to know your customer's internal trigger. It doesn't matter if it's consumer web, enterprise, SaaS products, offline, online, it doesn't matter. Every product that is used for one reason. And that one reason is to modulate our mood, to feel something different. So you have got to be able to tell me, what is your internal trigger? And if your product team can't name that internal trigger, you're flying blind. You're just hoping to get lucky. Make sure you can name that internal trigger, and does it occur with sufficient frequency to build a habit around? The next step of the hook model is the action phase. Now, the action phase is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of an immediate reward, the simplest thing that the user can do to get relief from that discomfort, to scratch their itch. Let me show you a few habit-forming products, and I want you to see just how simple this action is. Something as simple as a scroll on Pinterest, or a search on Google, or what could be simpler than just pushing the play button in YouTube. These incredibly simple behaviors done in anticipation of an immediate reward. Now, there's a simple formula that helps us predict the likelihood of these behaviors. This comes to us from a researcher at Stanford by the name of BJ Fogg, and he tells us that for any behavior B, we need three things at the same time. We need sufficient motivation, sufficient ability, that's the A stands for ability, that's how easy or difficult something is to do, and the T stands for triggers. We just talked all about those triggers. Now, let's talk about these three in succession. Motivation is about the energy for action, how much we want to do a particular behavior. Now, there are these 6 elements of motivation because all of us as human beings, we seek pleasure, we avoid pain. We seek hope and we avoid fear. We seek social acceptance and we avoid social rejection, right? So these 6 levers of motivation constantly influence us to be more or less likely to do a particular behavior. So every television commercial, every banner ad, every radio spot you've ever seen or heard fundamentally uses these 6 levers of motivation to increase the likelihood of a particular behavior occurring. Let's move on to the next part of B equals MAT. The A stands for ability, the capacity to do a particular behavior, how easy or difficult something is to do. And here again, we have these 6 levers of motivation, of ability that we can use to make a behavior more or less likely to occur based on how much time something takes, how much money something costs, how much physical effort is required. Brain cycles, this is a big one when it comes to mobile apps. The harder something is to understand, the harder it is for us to understand what needs to be done, the less likely we are to do it. Social deviance says that we become more likely to do something when we see other people like us doing it. And finally, non-routine says that we become more likely to do something simply for the fact that we have done it before in the past. Because the more we do something, the easier it becomes, and the more likely we are to do it again in the future. What do we call that? It's called practice, right? The more we do it, the easier it gets, the more likely we are to do it again and again in the future. So there's actually a very simple conceptual model that we can use. Everybody who builds products should know this model, that in order to get a particular behavior to occur, right? Let's say you built a great new mobile app and for whatever reason, people aren't doing what you've designed for them to do. They're not clicking, they're not transacting, they're not doing whatever action you want them to do. There can only be one of 3 reasons. Either they lack motivation on the y-axis, high motivation, low motivation, or they lack ability. If something is very easy to do, it's on the far right. If something is hard to do, it's on the far left. And when they have sufficient motivation and sufficient ability, if they cross that red threshold and a trigger is present, the behavior will occur every single time. Online, offline, enterprise, direct to consumer, doesn't matter. You have to have these 3 basic elements of motivation, ability, and a trigger every single time. If the user is not doing the design behavior, it's always one or more of these 3 potential causes. The next step of the hook model is the reward phase. The reward phase is where the user gets what they came for. It's where that itch is scratched just a little bit. Now, the interesting thing about the reward phase is that there's actually a way to supercharge desire. Did you know that there's a way that we can literally manufacture desire? Does anybody want to know how to do that? Anybody curious about how to manufacture desire? I see a lot of participants' hands raised. Well, I'm doing it to you right now by me taking that long pause. And I stopped talking for a minute. I was talking at a mile a minute. Then I stopped talking and I asked you a question. What I was doing just then was utilizing a principle called variable reward. We know that the unknown is fascinating. Any kind of mystery causes us to focus and engage, and it is highly habit forming. Why does this happen? Well, this goes all the way back to the experiments of B.F. Skinner, the father of operant conditioning. Skinner took these pigeons and he put them in a little box, and he gave them what today we call a Skinner box, and he gave them a food pellet. Okay, every time they pecked at the disc, they would receive a little food pellet. That was the reward. Now No big deal. He could train the pigeons to peck at the disc. By the way, as long as the pigeons were hungry, the pigeons were actually starved. So they were hungry in this experiment, reminding us that for our users, we can't just make people do whatever we want them to do. They have to actually have that desire. They have to want this thing. They have to be hungry for the product. We can't just, incentivize them and expect them to do it. They have to have that internal trigger. But as long as the internal trigger is there, Skinner could train these pigeons to peck at the disc whenever they were hungry. But then there was a problem. You see, one day Skinner walked into his lab and he didn't have enough of these food pellets. He realized he had run out for the day. Well, he couldn't afford to give them one pellet every time they pecked at the disc. He started to ration them out. He could only afford to give it to them once in a while. So sometimes a pigeon would peck at the disc, no reward, no food pellet. The next time the pigeon would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward. And what Skinner observed to his amazement is that the rate of response, the number of times these pigeons pecked at the disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. Because variability spikes activity in the part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, which causes us to engage, it causes us to focus, and it causes us to learn these new behaviors and habits. So in all kinds of products that you find most engaging, that capture your attention, you will always find one or more of these three types of variable rewards. Rewards of the tribe, rewards of the hunt, and rewards of the self. Let me introduce these to you briefly. Rewards of the tribe are about things that feel good, that have this element of variability, and come from other people. The search for empathetic joy, feeling good because someone else feels good, partnership, cooperation, competition, all these things come from other people, feel good, and have this element of variability. Best example online is, of course, social media, whether it's TikTok or Facebook or Instagram. Whenever you get likes, comments, shares, all these things come from other people, and they are, of course, variable. There's uncertainty there about how many likes you're going to get. What are the comments going to say? All kinds of variable rewards associated with social media. Next is a search for resources, what we call rewards of the hunt. Rewards of the hunt stem from our primal search for food and shelter, but in modern society, we buy these things with money. And so when people think of variable rewards, they oftentimes think of gambling. They think of slot machines, where the variable reward is what you might win when you play one of these games of chance. Now, interestingly enough, we see this same exact psychology at work online. Take, for example, LinkedIn. LinkedIn used to be about finding jobs. Today, it's about a content site. That's what LinkedIn is really about. Why? Well, when you log into LinkedIn on your mobile app, you scroll through and maybe that first story is not that interesting, or the second story is not that interesting, but maybe the third or fourth story is interesting. And what do you have to do to see more interesting content? You just have to keep scrolling. And that scrolling and scrolling uses the exact same psychology as pulling on a slot machine, both variable rewards of the hunt. And finally, rewards of the self. Rewards of the self are about the search for mastery, consistency, competency, and control. These are things that don't come from other people. They aren't about material rewards per se. These are the things that feel good in and of themselves. They're intrinsically pleasurable. Best example online is gameplay. So when you play Candy Crush or Angry Birds, you're not necessarily playing with other people. You're not even winning anything in terms of material possessions, but there's something fun about getting to the next level, the next accomplishment, the next achievement. And I know everybody attending today, you're all very serious business people. I know none of you play these games, right? Well, I bet you play this game every day. Your email inbox. Does that look familiar? Email is probably the mother of habit-forming technology. It has all the variable rewards. It has rewards of the hunt around information. You don't know what's in that email until you open it. It has rewards of the tribe. It comes from other people. Sometimes it's your boss. Sometimes it's spam. Sometimes it's important. Sometimes it's not. Very variable. And of course, there's rewards of the self, where it's about clearing that inbox, trying to get to this mythical place of inbox zero. All that is about rewards of the self, mastery, completion, competency, and control as well. And of course, it's all variable. So the point of the variable rewards phase of the hook model is to give the user what they came for, to scratch that itch, and yet leave them wanting more, a bit of desire around what they might find, a bit of curiosity around what they might find the next time they engage with a product. And finally, the last step of the hook model is the investment phase. The investment phase is where the user puts something into the product to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook. And investments do this in two ways. The first way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook is by loading the next trigger. So when you're building your mobile app and you want to make it habit forming, you have got to figure out a way to get the user to do something that brings themselves back. Don't just send them spammy messaging whenever you feel like it, something that they did to bring themselves back. Let me give you a great example. When someone sends a message on WhatsApp, there's no immediate reward. There's no points. There's no badges. Nothing really happens when you send someone a message. What you're doing when you send someone a message is that you are investing in the platform because you are likely to get a reply. And that reply comes coupled in the form. You see that red notification. What's that an example of? An external trigger that I loaded by sending that message. So this is the first way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook. This is where the user loads the next trigger to bring them back through the hook once again in the future. The second way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook is by storing value. Storing value is a really big deal. This is revolutionary because in the history of manufacturing, most products, things made out of atoms in the physical world, as opposed to made out of bits like on your mobile phone, they depreciated, right? Your clothes, your car, your furniture, all these things lose value with wear and tear. But habit-forming products should do the opposite. Habit-forming products, they don't depreciate, they appreciate. They get better and better the more we interact with them. And they do this because of this principle of stored value. Let me give you some examples. The more content we upload to a site like Google Drive, the better it becomes as our cloud storage solution. The more data we give an app, for example, the Mint app, it's a personal finance software. The more data we give the site, the better it becomes. And we can also use this on social media, for example. If you were to log into my Facebook account, it wouldn't be that interesting for you because it's been tailored to my interest based on my data. The more I use it, the better it becomes. Followers. Followers is a form of stored value that gets better and better with use. It's a better way to reach your audience. So let's say tomorrow, Twitter were to say, hey, Twitter's not free. Okay, you have to start paying for Twitter. Who's more likely to start paying for Twitter? Is it going to be someone with 10 followers or 10,000 followers? Of course, it's going to be the person with 10,000 followers because they've stored all that value in the form of their follower count. And finally, reputation on sites like Upwork or eBay or Airbnb. Stored value is value that I can literally take to the bank because my reputation on these sites dictates what I can charge for my goods and services. And how likely am I to stop using these products after I've built a good reputation? It's kind of hard to do. I'm probably not going to leave, even if a better product or service comes along, which brings me to this cold, hard conclusion. Listen carefully. It is not the best product that wins. I know you've been told this lie that all you have to do is build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. That is not true. Silicon Valley graveyards are full of companies that had the best technology. It's not the best technology that wins. That's just table stakes. You also have to have a hook because it's companies that can run users through these 6 steps of trigger, action, reward, investment. These are the companies that shape consumer preferences and form what we call the monopoly of the mind, the first to mind solution that we turn to with little or no conscious thought. And it's through successive cycles, through these hooks, that our preferences are shaped, that our tastes are formed, and that these habits take hold. So this is the most important slide of the presentation. If you are building a habit-forming app, you have got to be able to answer these 5 fundamental questions of number 1, what is the internal trigger? What's that itch that your product is addressing? And does it occur with sufficient frequency? Number 2, what's the external trigger that prompts your user to action? Number 3, what's the simplest action done in anticipation of a reward? And number 4, is the reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And finally, number 5, what's the bit of work the user does to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook? Now, before I take some questions, we have a few more minutes left here. I want to just remind you of one important thing, which is the morality of manipulation. I know many of you, while you were watching this presentation, were thinking to yourselves, is this okay to do to people? Is this ethical to use their hidden mode of psychology to get them to do things that we want them to do? And if you had that response, bravo. I appreciate that sentiment. I think that's very, very important because look, every form of design, I don't care if it's graphic design, usability design, interaction design, heck, interior design. They are all forms of manipulation. Any form of design is manipulating user behavior, but there are two kinds of manipulation. There's what we call persuasion, which is helping people do things they want to do. And then there is coercion, which is getting people to do things they don't want to do, things that they later regret. Persuasion is perfectly ethical. If we're helping people form a habit around learning a new language or exercising or being more productive at work, great, that's a healthy habit. But if we trick them into doing something they later regret, not only is that ethically a bad idea, it's also bad for business. Because maybe you'll trick them once, but eventually they'll figure out what you're doing. And they'll tell all their friends on social media to stop doing business with you. So we want to make sure that we use these tactics for good, because these technologies that we are building, these are the things that we take to bed with us every night. It's the first thing we reach for in the morning before we even say hello to our loved ones. And so what we have to do is to ask ourselves, what special responsibility do we have to use this technology and the psychology for good? And I encourage you to use these techniques to help people find meaning, to help them engage in something important. And if you allow me, I'd like to borrow from the words of Gandhi and encourage you to build the change that you wish to see in the world. And with that, thank you so much. I'd like to ask you for a very quick favor. If you could just go to this URL when you have a moment, there's 5 questions there. Would love to know what you thought of the presentation. Just take you maybe 30 seconds. And the reward for filling out that survey is to get the slides you just saw. You'll see it there. It says hooked presentation. And if you have a phone, you can just point your camera to that QR code. It'll take you straight to the survey as well. And if we don't get time to answer your question, I know we have over 400 people with us today, which is fantastic. If we don't get time to answer your question, please feel free to check out my website. There's a contact me page there where you can absolutely reach out to me, and I'll try my best to get back to you. And with that, I would love to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Nir. I mean, just like the apps that you mentioned, and I would like to publicly admit that, yes, I am hooked to my email app as well. And I just realized that while listening to your session, just like those apps.
Now you know why, though, right?
Yeah, now I can just, make sense out of all of that. But I love your take on the morality bit as well. And that is commendable. You being the face of, hooked as a book and the concept, having that morality and the ground that you hold, it's just superb. And I would like to call that out again to our users. But yes, just like those apps and your books, the session was definitely, kept all of us hooked. And I know you get that a lot. So I'm just going to right away apologize for that pun as well. But
not at all. It never gets old. I'll be honest with you. I love it. It's catnip for me.
Yeah, is it? Okay, so I'm glad. Okay, I'm gonna take the apology back then. But yet, thank you once again for enlightening us. And as you mentioned, we have like a plethora of questions coming up. But right now, we have Kedar Parekh, who heads the product at Netcore Cloud, who will be joining us for a fireside chat with you. Kedar has a prior experience in software development, data architecture, analytics, and data science across various brands. We also have an interesting contest coming up right after the fireside chat. So this is all for the audience out there. Please keep your eyes and ears open, make those notes, because yes, this chat is going to be pretty fiery. Hello, Kedar.
Yeah. Hi, Akanksha. Hi, Nir.
Hi, how are you?
Stage to you both again. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Akanksha. Thanks a lot, Nir. This was superb. I think this was a good recap of the book that I had read sometime back. Few things that absolutely stuck onto me is this thing that you said right at the start, right? You can buy growth, but you cannot buy engagement. I think that's very profound. Something for all of us to keep in mind. Another points like the difference between habit and addiction, or even this point that you said, right? The best product does not always win. These are things that we should really ponder upon and think hard. Very happy that you took this session. I have a few questions which maybe we could further discuss on extending the topic. So Nir, what happens if, let's say, a habit that you want with a customer, right? Your competition has the same exact habit. What do you do then?
Oh, that's a terrific, that's a really great question, because if you have a habit Well, lucky for you, that's great. But if you don't have the habit and your competition has the habit, you have a big problem. Because habits are a huge competitive advantage. As Warren Buffett says, it's a competitive moat around your business. So what do you do if somebody else has your consumer's habit? Well, there are four things that you can do. Number one, you can increase the frequency of use. So whenever there's a product that is used more frequently throughout the day, that's when there's an opportunity to recapture or capture the competition's customer habit. So what does that look like? This typically happens when there's some kind of interface change. So when we went from desktops to laptops to mobile phones and now to wearable devices, and now with Amazon Alexa, now there are auditory devices. Every time there's an interface change, that necessitates a new opportunity, right? A new opportunity for people to interact with a technology more frequently than the incumbents. So for example, the reason that Facebook had to buy Instagram was that Facebook was founded before the iPhone, before the App Store. It was built web first back in 2006. Instagram was founded after the iPhone. It was mobile first. And Zuckerberg astutely recognized that people check their phones way more than they check their laptop computers. So frequency of use is a way to capture the competition's habit. And that's why Zuckerberg had to buy Instagram. He bought it for $1 billion. Today it'd be worth about 50 billion, if not more. It was the deal of the century. He got a steal, even though I remember when he bought Instagram, everybody laughed at him and thought, oh my God, $1 billion for this stupid mobile app. Well, he understood the power of habits and that Instagram was a competitive threat to the Facebook scrolling habit. So that's number one, greater frequency of use. The other opportunity is greater velocity of use, right? So frequency is how often in the day. Velocity is how quickly someone can go through the hook. So this typically happens when there's an innovation in the action phase, when you can make a behavior dramatically easier, when you can simplify the steps and help people go through those 4 steps of trigger, action, reward, investment quicker than your competition. That's the second opportunity. The third opportunity is to make the reward more rewarding. And this is the hardest of the 4 to pull off because there are studies that find, there was one in the Harvard Business Review that found that to get someone to escape the habit that they're currently using, the product can't just be better. It has to be 9 times better. Okay, this was a study done on enterprise products. Very difficult to get someone to switch, even if the product is not as good as the new guy. It has to be way better to get someone to switch, but that does happen every once in a while. That's the reward phase. And finally, the fourth way is to make it easier to enter the hook in the first place. So a good example here is, about 10 years ago, the #1 enterprise software in the world was Microsoft Office. Today, it no longer is. Today, the #1 enterprise software is Google Docs. Well, how did that happen? How did Microsoft lose to Google Docs? It lost because at the time, this is actually more than 10 years ago, probably 15 years ago, when this shift happened, back then, to get Microsoft Office, you had to buy a disk and you had to pay money. And then Google Docs comes along and it's all free. It's all in the cloud. So if you're a college student and you just want to write your term paper, or you're an entrepreneur and you just want to use a spreadsheet, it was way easier to get into the Google Docs hook in the first place than to go buy Microsoft Office. And so that's the fourth way, is to make it easier to get into the hook in the first place. So frequency, velocity, make the reward more rewarding, and finally, easier entry into the hook.
Super. I think 1, 2, and 4 is definitely what you could definitely focus on. The third one is quite difficult, as you said. 9 times better is astonishing.
It's tough.
Tough.
Yeah, it happens, but it's rare.
Got it. Cool. What do you do if your product or service, by its very nature, right, is not habit forming, which means the frequency of purchase or interaction is not frequent enough? Let's take an example of insurance, or maybe a better example could be travel, right? I could take, and this is pre-COVID, of course. Now we can't travel much, but what do you do then?
Great question. Another great question. So this is a very common concern, because remember I said that a hook is a user experience that connects the user's problem to the user's problem to your product with enough frequency to form a habit. And the minimum bar seems to be about a week's time or less. So if your user is not interacting with your product within a week's time or less, you have a problem. It's very difficult to change a consumer habit, not impossible. There are some exceptions, but by and large, very difficult to change a consumer behavior if it does not occur within a week's time or less. Of course, the more frequent, the better, right? Part of the reason that social media, for example, is so sticky, so habit forming, is that people are checking their home screens 150 times per day on average. So more frequent is always better from a habit formation perspective. But what if you have a product, like you asked, that is just not used frequently? It's not used once a week. What do you do? Travel is a great category. Insurance is a great category. It's not going to become a habit. Buying a trip will never be a habit, right? I see this all the time in e-commerce. People come to me and they say, we want to make buying a habit. No, e-commerce companies are so committed to getting people to check out that they forget how to get people to check in. That's the opportunity. So don't make the buying the habit. Buying, by definition, is not something people do with little or no conscious thought. We don't spend money out of habit. We think about it. It can't be a habit. So don't even try to make it a habit. So what do? You attach the 3 C's. The 3 C's are content, community, and conversation. Content, community, and conversation. If you can find a way to bolt on more frequently occurring behaviors, like a content habit, right? Where people are consuming interesting content you're producing, a community of people, right? That's very engaging. That's something that people can engage with every day. And then finally, a conversation. If there's some kind of one-on-one dialogue that they're engaging with your company, also that's an opportunity. And there are examples of all of these. We don't have, I can go in more depth. If you check out my blog, there's a long article on this as well. But those are the 3 things that we would want to bolt on to a non-habit forming product in order that the result of engagement is monetization. Let me say that again. Write this down, folks. Monetization is a result of engagement. If we can get people to engage, eventually they'll monetize, right? It doesn't matter if you're selling kitchen knives or whatever you're selling. If you can get people to engage with your product when they're finally in market for that item, you're going to be the brand they go with.
Absolutely. I think, Neil, that's phenomenal, which is where now I'm able to relate. A lot of travel apps in India, be it Make My Trip or a few others, they invest heavily on content around travel, so that you read that content, you start planning your next trip. And when you actually hit that button is when this app comes to your mind first.
That's exactly right. Because maybe people go on vacation once a year, once every 5 years, but people dream about vacation every day, right? And some people really enjoy flipping through, content and imagining how great it would be if they could go to some luxurious location and what they would eat and where they would stay and where they might fly. That could be a habit, so that if you are the company that can provide them that content habit, where are they going to go when it's time to buy? They go to you. So monetization is a result of engagement, not the other way around.
Great. Nir, at what stage of product building across different phases, right, do you think product managers or entrepreneurs should think about the hook model?
Yeah, so the hook model is really helpful in 2 stages. It's super helpful in the very, very early days, right? Before any code has been committed, before any designers are hired. If you can just sit down, if you have a new idea for a mobile app, for example, if you sit down and you say, okay, what is our hook? You are going to save yourself so much pain and time and money if you sit down and ask yourself those 5 fundamental questions I talked about in my presentation. The other place it's useful is as a diagnostic tool. So if you look at your app and for whatever reason, people aren't coming back the way you wish they would, right? If you have a low percentage of habituated users, you can ask yourself, well, where is my product deficient? What's missing here? And by the way, there's many Netcore products. I have to give you guys a plug. There are many Netcore products that can help you improve your hook, right? Because, particularly with the investment phase, that's what you at Netcore do particularly well, is finding ways to improve that hook by understanding, is our internal trigger not well defined? Do we not send a clear external trigger? Is the action too difficult? Is the reward rewarding? And do we have an investment that increases the likelihood of the next pass through the hook?
Got it. Super. Nir, this part of the world, right, India and Southeast Asia, which is where I think we'll have most of the attendees from today, right? What we see is these are mobile first markets, which means not only people's primary access to the internet is mobile phone, but it's probably also for a large population, it is their only access to internet, right? So how do product managers think about app first when they think of product development or solving, let's say, a problem that's out there? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the rules don't change. So I oftentimes will I look for, the book was published back in what is it, 2014. So it's been a few years now. And I'm constantly looking for how the model can be improved. And one thing I tried to look for was cultural differences. I primarily studied the US market because I was in Silicon Valley at the time. Today I'm in Singapore. But I tried to look for cultural differences, and I'm happy to say that there is none. That there's no difference in terms of the 4 basic steps of the hook. What does change from culture to culture, or between sexes, or even between people, individuals, is what is rewarding. Okay, so what might be rewarding to one person is not going to be rewarding to another person, right? So in India, people might find cricket very rewarding and interesting, but in America, very few people watch cricket. They watch American football, which might not be so popular in India. So people have different preferences and tastes. That will certainly change, but the overarching category of some kind of variable reward, what makes cricket fun to watch, is the same thing that makes American football fun to watch: variability. We want to see where the ball is going to go, right? That's what it's all about.
Great, great. Nir, I'll quickly take some questions from the audience. They have been very excited about this entire thing. For instance, what is your opinion on methods for atomic habit by, I think, James Clear? I think there are a lot of parallels. He also probably talks about the B equal to MAT model. But any thoughts?
Yeah, so James is a good friend of mine. I see him every year, and he actually put me in the book. I'm proud to say I'm in one of the chapters, so I'm very honored. And yeah, Atomic Habits is a wonderful book, and I think there's I think it's a great book for the layperson audience, right? If you just want to build a habit for yourself, it's a great book. For product designers, I don't think James wrote it for product designers, right? I wrote it for product designers because I wanted to build habit-forming products. Like I literally, when my last company was acquired, I wanted to know, how do I build a habit-forming product? And I looked around and I couldn't find a book that taught me that. So I decided to write it for myself by doing years of research and teaching at Stanford and making sure I knew, talking to everybody I could in Silicon Valley who was, at these companies I admired. So that's the big difference. I think, the basic model of how a habit is formed has been around for decades. I think my contribution is, one, emphasizing the internal triggers, not just the external triggers. Most of the habit literature is about, environmental cues. Well, I would argue that from a product perspective, we don't want to have to rely on external cues, right? If your product always needs some annoying notification in order for it to get used, forget it. That's not forming a habit. A habit has to be when the user triggers themselves. So understanding the uncomfortable emotional state that you're going to attach your product's use to, that internal trigger, is not something that's covered in anybody else's literature. And I think it's super important. And then I think the variable reward part is very, very important. You don't typically see that in the habit literature around, how important it is to have this element of mystery, particularly in product design. And then finally, the investment phase. That's not in Atomic Habits or any other books, but it's specific to products, because if you are not making the product with use better with use, you're missing a huge, huge opportunity. So those are some of the key differences.
Cool. Nir, I think the next one is exactly similar to the one that you said for e-commerce, right? How do I increase purchase frequency on e-commerce? This is, I'm sure, is a genuine question, but similar to that, the question is, how do you do variable rewards in case of regular e-commerce companies?
Yeah, so you don't make the purchase the habit. That's the biggest mistake I see, is you cannot make the purchase the habit. So it's back to those 3 C's of content, community, and conversation. That's what I would do if it's a product that's not bought frequently enough, or the product not being the thing that's bought, but the experience. If the experience isn't something that's used within a week's time or less, you have to bolt on something that is habit forming.
Right. Nir, I think the point is, how do you, let's say, do variable rewards in terms of e-commerce? Is there a thought there? Can you even do variable rewards on e-commerce?
Sure.
To be a feedback loop, right?
Sure. So for example, there's a company in the States called Williams-Sonoma. Do you have it in India? Williams-Sonoma? It's a cookware company. They sell fancy knives and pots and pans and all kinds of stuff for home chefs. And they realized they had this problem that people don't buy cookware weekly. That's never going to become a habit. So they use the sea of content, right? So what do they have? They have this website that every day, twice a day, creates interesting content, recipes and chef interviews and videos, all this content that people get hooked to, so that when they do want to buy cookware, they're going to buy it from Williams-Sonoma. And so the content is variable, right? It's rewards of the hunt. What cool recipe do they have today? Who's the interview with? What's the video about? That's the variable reward. So that's one way. I've since discovered, since I've been in Asia, I've been living in Singapore for about the past year and a half, I discovered a very interesting trick that uses variable rewards here in Asia. I've never seen it in America. I don't know if they do it in India, but it's genius, okay? Whenever we order from a local e-commerce vendor here in Singapore, 9 times out of 10, they will put in a surprise in the box. Do they do this in India?
No.
It's genius. It's stuff that costs pennies, right? My wife ordered a new phone. Okay. It was a $700 phone. They tossed in a $3 set of headphones that we didn't order, but they thought we might need. It doesn't matter if we actually need it. That's a variable reward. Wow. I didn't expect that. It cost them almost nothing, right? But that's a variable reward that, wow, every time I order something from this e-commerce site, they give me a little extra. It's a beautiful variable reward.
I think we have seen brands do it for kids, especially. Like there is this thing called as Kinder Joy, which is a sweet for kids that comes with a toy, and that toy is surprise. You never know what toy it comes with.
Brilliant, right? Why doesn't every company do this? It's so nice. It's so endearing.
Absolutely.
And by the way, we actually, I looked into this. The reviews from the company where she bought her phone, people mention it. You know, there's tons of positive 5-star reviews because, oh, thanks for sending me the extra little bonus gift. It was unexpected. It was such a surprise. That's a variable reward.
Cool. Nir, I think we have question for time for one last question.
Sure.
Besides notifications and emails, right? What are some great ways to place external triggers?
Yeah. So there are many different kinds of external trigger. You can do owned triggers that you have the right to send somebody. You can do paid triggers where you do advertising. Those can be triggers as well. There's all kinds of triggers. The important thing is to understand what makes for a great external trigger and what makes for a terrible external trigger. The difference between an external trigger that feels like magic and one that feels like spam is one word. And that one word is context. Context. Do I have time for a very quick story? I'll tell you a very quick anecdote. So before COVID, I was on a long haul flight and I was sitting in the aisle seat. And across from me in the aisle, there was a gentleman who was clearly asleep. Okay. He had a big pillow and a blanket, clearly asleep. The flight attendant comes down the aisle and she turns to him and she says, "Sir," and he's asleep. He doesn't hear. So she says it louder. Second time, she says, "Sir." Still, he doesn't wake up. Everybody's kind of looking around like, why does she want to wake him up? She says it a third time. She says, "Sir." And he says, what is it? What is it? And she says, "Sir, what would you like to drink?" And this is such a great example of what we product designers do to our users all the freaking time. Did he want a drink? Yes, but not right now when he's sleeping. He wants the drink when he is thirsty. But she interrupted him when it was convenient for her. We do this all the time. We send our users pings and dings and notifications when it's convenient for us without considering when does it serve the need of our users? When will it serve the need of our users? The answer is when we can closely couple the external trigger with the internal trigger. The closer you can couple that external trigger to that internal trigger, to the feeling of boredom, loneliness, fatigue, hunger, thirst, whatever it might be, whatever that internal trigger is, when you can make it as close as possible to the time and place when I'm likely to feel that internal trigger, that's when people will respond to your external trigger. And that's when they will start forming that habit, as opposed to if you just send it whenever you feel like it.
Great answer. And I think great example to drive the point. I'm going to remember that forever now. Thanks a lot, Nir. I think this was absolutely engaging and you got us hooked, like Akanksha said. I'll be just mindful of time and call in Akanksha again.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Nir, just a second. And
oh, yeah, sure. Sorry.
Before you leave, yeah, I know you'll be like, okay, why she's behind me? Now let's leave. But if you can, I just want to take a moment and thank you, both of you, Nir, Kedar. I definitely cannot tell you what we love more, the presentation or the chat, those lovely anecdotes. I think we're all going home with a lot of learnings. And before Nir, you leave, can you just help our audience with a quick note on this workshop? If you could just, tell people about, just in a, very, very quick moment, and then you can definitely leave.
Sure. I'm sorry. Tell them about what now?
Your workshop on Hook. If you could
on my website?
Yes.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. Yeah. So my website here, I'll put it in the chat. My website is nirandfar.com. And there you will find there's information about my workshops where you can, there's a lot more depth on building habit forming products. And I think now I remember what you're talking about is our special discount that we have. But to be honest, you've been working with Julie on that, and I don't even know what you've cooked up for the audience. I know it's something special. Maybe you can tell us more.
So we're having a contest around that, Nir, and the lucky winner, we have 3 questions for them across, your sessions, and the lucky winners will get a free seat into your Hooked workshop. So basically, that's what we have. So if you have something for the audience.
Excellent. It's a fantastic course. It's a $500 course, but it goes into a lot more depth, a lot more examples, a lot more visual depth as well. And so, yeah, very, very thankful that there'll be 3 lucky winners. Congrats.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much. On that note, Nir and Kedar, thank you so much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure to host you both.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.